Well, thanks very much, Megan. But before you resume your seat, what we might do is take some questions and answers. If anyone's got any questions, please just stand up and say your name, and we'll invite you to ask a question. I can. Yes, there is a microphone. Yes.
Yes. Thank you for your excellent presentation, and I believe that there are a lot of material that you're dealing with that would be useful to schools, as you have mentioned. My name is Ernest. I'm working for the Department of Education and Community Relations, and we deal with a lot of refugee parents, community kids that have some rights when they come to Australia. But at the same time, they are asylum-seeking kids. Sometimes they come in when they're in high schools. We don't have much support for them transition to work. Sometimes they have really limited literacy and numeracy skills. And I think as a person who works within the Department of Education that we need more support from broader society towards schools that are just catering certain services and not producing those services. Maybe if you can offer your comment today.
Well, I can only agree with you. And so a lot of my advocacy, I have a lot to do with asylum seeker and refugee kids. And I've been, when there were children in immigration detention, the Human Rights Commission, including myself, visited a number of centres to talk to the young people. That's why the settlement program is so important in Australia, and the settlement schools as well, so that people do get proficiency with the language as early as they can. But you're right. I mean, a lot of these young people have had a journey where they've missed a whole lot of school already. So, they've got a big journey, and they really do. If we don't want them to, not graduate, not get a job and go down the wrong path, we really do need to invest in them. Because they're, as young people, they are such good material, and they're so hopeful when they come to this country. And so the more we can invest in them, the better. So I'm very happy to work with anybody who wants to be a strong advocate for greater support for asylum-seeking and refugee children. I mean, many of these young people now have a very uncertain future. That is very worrying as well. We don't know what their citizenship status will be into the future, and that's, I think, living with that. Some of them are born in Australia, have that situation. So I think we've got a real problem on the horizon here if we don't change our policy positions in that space. So I can only agree with you. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Furkan Janssens. I'm writing a journalistic piece for a university assignment. This question is going to be a bit personal. What inspired you to advocate for children's rights? Was there a specific event you might have heard of or witnessed? Anything like that?
It's a really interesting question. Why do we all end up where we end up? And I often think about that. It's probably, my mother was a teacher, and my mother was a single parent. So that was probably one of the things in my life, where you see people having a rough time. And so that's probably important in my life. But because I've been working in child protection and juvenile justice, terrible things happen to children, and they're incredibly resilient actually, and most of them get through. But it from that experience working in those places and in those spaces, I just want to do whatever I could to make the world a better, safer place for kids, Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the actual method and format of the engagement with children. I'm very interested in that as a policymaker, because we're used to dealing with representative associations, but directly engaging with children is something very interesting to me.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people think it's really hard or really risky, but it's not. I mean, all of you have been children or have children, and you talk to children on a daily basis, it's not that hard. And I guess coming from a teaching background, it just wasn't a stretch for me. And we have had, I've now done quite a few consultations for the Federal Department of Social Services on the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children with kids. You've got to do it right, and you've got to do it with care. And often I will go through organisations that can support the child. But really, it's just a matter of thinking about what's an engaging exercise that you can get views about a thing. You can also depersonalise questions, so ask about a kind of theoretical story rather than their particular story, so they can engage in that way. But I think there's so many different ways you can listen to kids. When I first started in the role, I did a few things. I did an online survey. I put out a whole lot of postcards asking, if life would be better for children and young people in Australia and people just wrote back, sent me back drawings, all sorts of other things. But I also get down on the floor and pick up diseases from kids. So I got a real network of schools, early childhood centres, youth groups, sporting clubs. Just a month ago, I was up with the scout leaders, little scout leaders, up in Brisbane, and so we just did an exercise. They were some of the ones who gave me that information about what makes a place safe for kids. But in that National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children, they now incorporated children's voices into that project as a matter of course, which is fantastic, because you don't want to design programs that don't work. And they're the ones, what's the point? And they're the ones that will know what will work for them. Like the cyberbullying space, adults, it's like an online space, it's just crazily scary for adults, but it's not for kids. You've got to go to the kids to find out what will work for them and protect them in those spaces. It's no point asking adults who don't even understand how the computer works, let alone it's not their sort of native thing to do every day is to be online. So sometimes we panic about things that they're not panicking about, and sometimes we don't panic about things that we should be panicking about because they're worried about it. So tapping into their worlds and their thinking is absolutely critical. Yeah.
Megan, I've got one question myself. I mean, given the concerns, obviously, that we've got kids in detention seeking asylum, we've got Aboriginal children in Australia in record numbers in prisons, despite the fact that Australia has ratified the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. Do you think it's time that we once and for all had a Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights in Australia?
I think that would be fabulous. So let's do that. One of the problems of the Australian discourse is we don't have a Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights, and so people are not sure what rights are. They can get a bit scared of them. They think they're about entitlement, but they're actually about the very basic things that help us to be humans and that to help us to get on. They're like health, a family, a home, an education. These aren't scary things. And so if we had a Bill of Rights, then it could we would then expect that to flow through all our laws and policies. But at the moment, it's up to people like me and you to keep knocking on the doors of people to say, have you thought about children's rights, or have you thought about human rights? And if you had that basic infrastructure, that rights infrastructure, it would sort of trickle down into what we did and how we thought. And at the moment, it really requires people from the ground up to be champions, and that's a lot of effort on our part. So I think if we should be looking towards a Bill of Rights in Australia. Yeah.
Especially given that so many people seem to think we've already got one. Yeah. which is a bit terrifying. So it does come from the ground up. We really need to educate people that we don't even have one. We're the only Western country not to. So,
yes, that's right.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Any more questions from the floor?
Sorry, a microphone came back to me. Just a question about comparing other countries in the world, talking about Western countries. Yeah. Would you have any picture how Australia is performing on that scale? So which country, European countries, can we copy certain regulations and laws that would imply for Australia? Yeah. That would be first part. And second part, you did mention a little bit lack of interest from a policymaker side. Maybe if you can list a few obstacles that you see that are preventing you to perform better in your position.
Yes, it's a good question in that we are actually reporting to the United Nations this year on how we're going against the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So it's a very timely question. And as the National Human Rights Institution, I'll be putting in a report later this year. So I'm actually gathering a whole lot of information about how children are going in the Australian context as part of that process and to furnish that report. I would say Australian children do pretty well on the whole. I mean, and I want to tell the good story as well. But there are pockets of the population, like Indigenous children, like asylum seeking and refugee kids, who do very poorly and don't have their rights met. So I think, and it's always those pesky Scandinavians that do really well at everything. But there are lots of things we can learn from some of those countries as to how to treat your children, how to invest in your children, how to focus on your children. We tend to think of children as an afterthought rather than at the centre of our thinking about things. And I'd say that's true even of institutions. The Royal Commission showed us that they were thinking about the reputation of the agency, not the well-being of the child. That's what they were acting on. Not the well-being of the child. So they ignored children when they spoke up if they had the gumption to speak up. So, I mean, that just shows we've got the lens wrong. In terms of what's stopping the policymakers, I think one of the things that stops us is because we don't have a Bill of Rights. And so it hasn't filtered down into the laws and policies. So it's not top of mind when people think about it. I think some people are really scared of children and like family court judges, I should say. So some people are really scared of talking to children, and it just scares them, and so they avoid it. And some people don't see the value in engaging children. And I just think if they spent a minute with a child talking about what their perspectives are, they would change their view about that. So they don't give them the credit that they should. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much. Look, I think that probably does us for time. So I'd like to invite Carolyn Valbuena, Principal Implementation Manager from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, to present a small gift of our appreciation to Megan Mitchell on behalf of Affinity.